Okay, let's see. Kicking this off right now. Let's see if I can actually get stuff working. Hey everybody. Let's see. I am not logged in, so I have no idea if anyone's in chat. But let's get going. I'm such a newbie at this stuff. And I have no idea who's going to show up this week. So let me get into... sign in with this. I had a meeting that ran over, so I was running a little late. Okay, let's see if this logs in. I think I fixed the latency issue. This time it's hitting my... Oh yeah, I know. Cool. Okay, sounds good. Well, I think this is actually delayed a lot less, and yeah, maybe I'll shift it towards later in the day, but we'll see. Yeah, I think the latency is like just a few seconds now, which is nice. Cool. Wow. I have more than 0 people watching, which is amazing. Okay, so let's come up with some ideas of what would be kind of cool to talk about. Cool. Let's see. Maybe I can get my screen sharing stuff working. I need to pull up ExcaliDraw. New drawing. Okay. Turn this into dark mode. Cool. Let's see what happens. Oh. It's actually like pretty decent. Cool. Yeah, still learning OBS, so this is actually kind of fun to see what works and what doesn't. Let's see, maybe I can make this a little wider. Yeah, a little wider. Sweet. Okay, so let's see. Going to see, there's some. So hey, my name is Nathan Toups. For the uninitiated, I'm a platform engineer. I've been consulting with a few companies. Just started getting back into consulting and platform engineering. I guess back in November. And so I've got a background in SRE. I've been a CTO at early stage startups, and I'm also the co-host on a podcast called Book Overflow, where we read lots of software engineering books. We're actually in the midst of reading one of my favorites, actually, which is a Will Larson book. It's our second Will Larson book, and you'll see I'm a Will Larson fanboy, but he has one called Crafting Engineering Strategy, which actually has some really cool things to think about. You know what? That might be actually like some fun things to explore. Let's see, Will Larson. We can bring this up. Irrational exuberance. Yeah. So, I don't know if you've, Will Larson actually keeps a really good blog. I think a lot of people like want to keep blogs and are not the best about it. And, yeah, there's just like a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure that we're going to get through all of these books, and yeah, maybe I'll kind of toot my own horn for a second, right? So I am the co-host on a podcast called Book Overflow. It's a podcast for software engineers. We've been really lucky to have a bunch of really great guests on, and like I said, the latest book that we've been reading is Crafting Engineering Strategy. Oh yeah, welcome back, by the way. Glad your meeting got done so quickly. And yeah, so we just had our first episode about it, but there's a lot of like really great supporting material in his blog, and there's actually a lot of links in the book that come back to the blog, which is kind of cool because he's got this much material. And recently, obviously, because of all the large language model stuff, he's got a lot of topics on, how do they share Claude transcripts, which I think is really kind of cool. This is something I've been running into. I don't know if others have as well, which is, okay, so you're using Claude Code, you're using, Codex or whatever. How do you start sharing skills across the rest of your team? How do you make sure that the quality of the work is where it needs to be? And I think that there's a lot of folks that are starting to build little custom tools like this. It's one of the nice things about large language models is that you can build little tools. And yeah, so he kind of builds in public. He kind of thinks in public. And yeah, it's been really cool. His latest book, again, is a Crafting Engineering Strategy. Oh, great. We got a question, too. So it says, have a couple of questions about how you run RFCs and incorporate into ADRs. Ooh, okay. I guess I'm more specific on the RFC portion. I intend to keep track of things in GitHub. I don't know what may be the best flow for RFCs with GitHub, comments on a PR, an issue. This is a great question. So, the question is RFCs and what's the best flow for this? I've kind of gone back and forth. First of all, I will say that I'm not going to pretend to be the authoritative person. I've tried a bunch of things, but I've been getting back into using Git for things more often. I think it really depends on the team, right? So if your team is very Git oriented and you're very comfortable opening issues or using a pull request to get feedback, there's a team I'm currently working with that uses this pattern, and it's been great because we write our RFCs in Markdown. Large language models will even help us with some of the structure and tooling of it. Obviously, you don't want to vibe code your RFC. That'd be bad. But it is helpful to have a few things in place so that you can easily make the changes. It depends on the audience, though. If there are non-technical folks, or if you have tools that you enjoy, for instance, I've had a really good workflow where the RFC is in Notion, right? And that way it's easy for people to highlight and put a comment or do these other things. And so, yeah, so let's see. RFC, right? Which is, again, this idea is a request for comment. You'll see this named different things in different organizations. And then ADR. Is the architectural design requirements. And so typically, you'll see a flow where, okay, cool. Stream delay is almost nothing, it seems, but the text size is still limited. And everyone will be, let's see, cool. Okay, so everyone will be technical. We leverage Git a bunch. Cool. Okay, so I will say using RFCs for this is really a lot of fun. We've actually started doing something called, we've drifted away from a formal RFC into something called, let me see if I can let me switch over to my main camera for a second. spec-driven development. And I bring this up just because this is sort of like an evolution of what some of the stuff. Let me see if this is like a good breakdown of what we have going on. Yeah. So I'll show you, like, again, this isn't for everyone, and it's sort of like your mileage may vary. Let me see. There we go. So your mileage may vary, but the idea here is that we've started using a pattern similar to this, where we'll have like an FRD and an HLA, which are sort of like, actually, you know, I actually don't remember what FRD. I think, is it functional requirement document? Yeah, functional requirements document, and then HLA is, what is that? Actually, can't remember what an HLA is. Oh, that's funny. But basically, we set these requirements documents that live within these something that's optimized for large language models. But again, even if it's just humans that are doing this, it actually still is pretty nice. But you basically have, like, we have something very similar to this. We have this agents MD, we have this project MD, architecture MD. These might be like large level context. And then with the design document, you'll end up drafting up exactly like the breakdown of what you want. And then we spent several iterations doing a review with other humans on, is this a good spec, right? And very similar to how you would do with an RFC. The only difference is that we actually put our checklists, they end up going inside of the spec as well. And these checklists, of course, again, humans can handle these, but also can agents. And it ends up giving us like this nice sort of living thing that lives next to the implementation work that we're doing. And so we actually let the spec evolve over time as needed, though we try to not change that unless there's like a review process in place. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that if you're not going to do spec-driven development, and then yeah, RFCs living in your repo is something that I've typically have a folder like this. Let me show you. Like, we'll end up having something like docs, and then inside of docs, you know, we'll have docs, and then we'll have RFC, we'll have ADR, like this. And honestly, if I was in Confluence or if I was in Notion, we'd have a very similar thing, right? Also, I don't know if you've seen one of my favorite RFC styles is HashiCorp. Let me pull their thing up. I'm gonna switch over. Let's see, HashiCorp RFC template. Yeah. So this is one of my favorites. It's not super opinionated. I mean, I would say it's actually very, very opinionated, but it's it starts with a Google Doc that you can go with. You know, I like this structure a lot if I'm doing RFCs. And again, a request for comment, what I like to think about with the request for comment is that you have some decision point. You need people to sign off on it. You should actually have as much information for people to make a full-featured decision as possible. And so typically you're going to lay, just like good storytelling, right? You're going to lay a background. This is the background of like, hey, here's why it's necessary to make this change, or here's this thing that I'm working on. We have a proposal, right? And the proposal would be this, you know, how, now that we've acknowledged this background, we propose this change that goes into place. And I actually like this optional section, and we've done this before where we've acknowledged abandoned ideas. What's useful about this is, let's say most companies have this, right? Some broken system, and people have tried in the past to fix it, and it's been a complete disaster. And there's a lot of like, oh man, this person's trying to fix this thing again, right? Having this context in the background, and then also talking about ideas that have been abandoned, is really cool. This can either be short-term things like, oh, we thought this and we thought that and we're going to go away, or it can also be failed RFCs in the past, right? Failed initiatives in the past. But yeah, there's like a big thing here of, obviously breaking these down to back up your arguments. These are things that would, here's an example of implementation, right? This is, again, I'm a big believer that RFCs should try to make it as obvious as possible. So if you have some big code change, or you're changing like the schema of something, or if you have a new design constraint, like we recently just had an RFC on temporal patterns with a client I'm working with. And the idea was that we have a data pipeline. We never want to delete anything. We want to use an append-only structure where if we update some record, we keep the previous record, but we put a new one, and we have an as-of date, right, or a recorded at, or whatever, some temporal pattern where we can say, tell me what the value of this record is as of this date, right? This is, if you've read designing data-intensive applications or these other things, you know that these kind of patterns can be really nice depending on the structure of the data that you have. It allows you to see how things evolve over time. So we spent a lot of extra time, like the CTO wrote this temporal data patterns RFC. We debated a few things. I remember that one of the things that I realized is that how we tombstone data, which is an external data source deletes something, but we need to represent that it's deleted within an append-only log. We need a tombstone saying like it was deleted, right? This record existed, but now it's deleted. We needed to have that a better definition. So he went back and wrote a better definition, right? And so actually in my newsletter I just came out with a lot yesterday. There's an Eames quote. Let me see, Rojo Robato. I'm quoting my own newsletter here. Charles Eames quote. It says, "The details are not the details; they make the design." Right. And so, if you're ever going to be pedantic about things, this is when you are pedantic. Right. The details are the design. Right. The design is the details. So, if one little code smell thing just doesn't quite sit right, the RFC is the time to get into it. And this isn't actually the first time. Okay, so what you think the RFC is meant to get your specific idea in place as opposed to just collecting ideas. I do. So, and I will say, like, I'm trying to, in my view, and this is sort of the HashiCorp view of an RFC, is that it's a template to help team members propose a solution for a problem and get feedback on that proposal, right? So it's not necessarily that you have an end-to-end solution for everything, but it shows that you've thought about this thing that you want, right? So for instance, as we're building out this temporal system, after we had this RFC, we did realize, well, actually, streaming tables are a little different than Delta tables in Databricks, right? And we needed to go back and say, okay, well, when we have this type of thing, here's how we think about temporal patterns. And we have this type of thing, here's how we think about temporal patterns. But the heavy lifting was, we still have this RFC to base things off of. If you go into a long history of RFCs, right? The IEEE is a great example of like the best RFCs. I think it's what we're all mimicking, which is that an RFC from them is that, let's see, RFC, then an ADR on how much privileges we should provide our customers in MySQL. Yeah, okay. So the more upfront thinking you can do, the better, I guess. So it becomes more costly if we're thinking of ourselves as a jazz musician, right? I've talked about this in the past on Book Overflow. You can think of yourself as an orchestra where you're the conductor, and you can think of yourself as a jazz musician who just kind of like riffs off of the things. They're both great ways of creating music, right? But one of them, the stakes are super high. You have a ton of people involved. You maybe wanted to have a careful orchestration of exactly the emotional moments and all of these things that happen in an orchestra, right? The timing, all these things. Where in a jazz ensemble, we kind of decide the chord progressions or listen to each other and kind of riff off of it. And that's also like a lot of fun, a very fun way of making music. one of them is appropriate in certain situations, and one of them is appropriate in other situations, right? If you're making the score for a film, film score, you probably want an orchestra. You probably want somebody to try out ideas to pull your emotional strings. And then that timing of the movie and all these things are going to play together. I guess you could have a jazz ensemble for a movie, but you do it 20 times and it's going to be 20 different scores, right? And so the ADR is going to get even more detailed than an RFC, but the RFC should really be like, hey, I have this important thing. We should spend time and energy on it. Here's where our brain is. Here's how you would implement such a thing. Like, we're not going to give all the details on it, but you really want to say like, okay, this is the pattern. These are the constraints. And again, I had another startup I was in where we got really pedantic about temporal data. I don't know why I'm just bringing up temporal data, but we had a probably week and a half back and forth on the data types for the columns of Postgres or something for some data structures that we needed. And it was worth every moment of a back and forth, people really passionately fighting for their viewpoints on this thing. Once the RFC was written, it became this kind of guiding document. And when people wrote their ADR, right? So we had microservices. And so this was an expectation that data was structured this way, right? We did append only, we did these things. You could reconstruct from moving the time cursor to different places. But we let every team go implement their own stuff. Some of them used Postgres. Some of them used, I think it was like timescale DB, which I guess is a variant of Postgres, but they had different constraints on how would they actually implement this, or that they had certain special architectural considerations for like how they did certain things based on the source of the data and these other things. That's what the ADR is for, right? The ADR says, we have this RFC, we have these architectural design things, we're going to be using the same exact patterns from this other project, or this other project's not appropriate, we're actually going to be doing this, and here's what's affected, and here's the breaking changes, right? Like all of those things, that's what's in the ADR, these like really detailed constraints. But the RFC should be a guiding document for that, right? The ADR should not contradict the RFC, for instance. And if it does contradict the RFC, you probably in your ADR needs to have really good rationale for why the RFC is actually not a good guide. RFC and then an ADR around how much privileges. Now again, these are the rules you get to make up for yourself. That's not necessarily like the most fun thing to hear. That I've been in like a bunch of different companies where RFC meant a very different thing from one place to the other. In some places, these were super informal. In some places, they were super formal. Actually, I think a good counterexample to this is, if I remember correctly, Oxide Computers RFC. I actually like, here we go. So they don't have an RFC. They have an RFD, which is a request for discussion, and I think they actually have an RFD about RFDs, which is the most RFD thing you could do. Also, I will say, numbering your RFDs is really important. I like that they actually have that these are in discussion or published. Cool examples. Okay, good. Just looking for So again, HashiCorp and places that you respect is always a good place for examples, right? HashiCorp has like a really clear process for how they do things. Oxide Computers, which I think is easy to fanboy about, is another excellent example, just because they're doing really hard stuff, right? They're building server infrastructure with the expectations of what you would have with API layer for cloud. They're building a bunch of like embedded Rust and all this other stuff. So design decisions that they make are quite important. And so why don't we look at one? Okay, here's one. The Oxide hiring process. And if you notice, they're not super long, right? But yeah, this is by Brian Cantrell, and he yeah, it's written sort of like a blog post, right? Certain things that they're looking for, they want, theirs is interesting that they really care about good writing, right? So this is, and this is important. This is a good example of a constraint. This thing gets brought up and says, hey, these are our core values. This is what we're looking for when we hire. This is, even if they're a great engineer, but they can't write, they won't thrive here because we care about this and that you must provide a writing sample, right? So what I like about this is that if you're ever confused, how should we hire? How should we analyze this? What's the requirements for education and background, right? What requirements for formal education? These kind of let you go back and make a decision on, am I acting in alignment with, the previously agreed upon stuff? And again, I like this style of formality, and I think it's super useful. This also ties in really well with, where was it? Did I leave it? Let's see, Will Larson. This actually ties in really well with this engineering strategy work, which he doesn't specifically talk about RFCs and ADRs and stuff. But when you're thinking strategically, I think that these steps really kind of fit well within the RFC framework. And the steps for building engineering strategy, right? He talks about these like discrete steps of exploring, diagnosing, refining, setting policy and operations. These are all topics that I think would be really useful to touch on in an RFC, right? A good RFC says, hey, we went back and investigated, what was it? How much privileges we should provide our customers in MySQL, right? So we went out and investigated how other companies are doing MySQL privileging systems. Both what's established and what's the trend of what's going on. And so maybe you cast the net wide, you say, oh, there's these new patterns that look exciting. We're on this cloud provider and now they can use RBAC. We don't even have to use traditional users, or there's this new framework that allows us to do ephemeral credential brokering or, whatever. I'm just making something up. But that's the exploration phase. Diagnostics, right, is this idea that you understand why. Why is the thing, why are you even writing the RFC in the first place, right? Like, I'm diagnosing that we've struggled to get permissions at the level that meets our values with this, and it makes us nervous, and we can't sleep at night because we suspect that privilege escalation is something that could really happen, or I'm just again riffing, and then there's this refining stage, right? And this is an important part of the RFC process where you're like, okay, so I've got all my exploration, I've got my diagnosis. How do I make a cohesive, refined set of arguments, a refined set of ideas? And the refining phase is super important. And he argues that not only, it doesn't have to happen just in that one discrete step. You can refine as you go, right? Depending on the project, you may have a ton of research and exploration you did, and you kind of refine that down to the stuff you care about, right? You do a bunch of diagnostics, and then you kind of refine that down. You can do those kind of as you go along. The policy and operations side, setting policy is probably, we're getting to the edge of what an RFC is for, and then operations is outside the scope, right? You might propose some operational aspects of this in the RFC, like, oh, we think that with this pattern, we could, shift left and, do all these things where even if, some, malicious code was introduced, the worst that they can do is, read all of the data within this context window or whatever. But the ADR itself is going to be the sort of operational side, right? It says, okay, I'm taking all of these ideas. Here's how we actually implement it within our MySQL infrastructure. But I found this framing to be really nice. If this was actually thinking about it strategically is a nice way of thinking about how to write RFCs and ADRs, right? Is this idea that you kind of squint at it and you're like, okay, the RFC is kind of the shape and the philosophical foundation of what we're doing. If we all can get head nods and agree, yes, this is the right move, right? We need to think about, we need to have this new way of thinking about auth. We have to, this new way of thinking about SQL infrastructure. We're using, it could even be something wild, right? We think that MySQL is inappropriate for the future because it lacks, row-level access controls like this Postgres technology over here has, or whatever, right? Like, I'm just making something up. Is that we actually think strategically new projects shouldn't use MySQL. We think that they should use this new database technology, and we're advocating that all new projects, switch over to using this other SQL database. It could be that large of an idea, and then of course the ADR would be quite robust because advocating switching databases or a migration path would be big deal. Yeah, so this is actually kind of a fun topic. I really appreciate you bringing this up. Let me see if let me think of this RFC. I'm trying to think what the best patterns that I've seen. And let's see. I'm doing some searching to see if I can figure out what some other good examples of organizations that I'd be curious though. Again, it's like a social norms thing. You, Carter, mentioned something about if it's not written and approved, what are you doing? Can't remember the exact phrase, but it's a good shout out for me. Oh, yeah. That's funny. I'm trying to remember the specific context. If it's not written and approved, what are you doing? Yeah, the strategy will have, yes, I think I do kind of remember, to kickstart RFCs on your own. I wonder how to kick this off as an organization if you've mandated. Okay, this is a great question. So the question is, let's say your organization doesn't have a discipline of using RFCs. And I've actually been in organizations like this where I said I was going to write an RFC and I got an eye roll. They're like, no, just write an implementation or, bring this up in a meeting. What the best thing you can do is show that an RFC actually helped you. It did bring value, right? I write an RFC because I need this to have careful consideration. It shows that you think deeply about topics. What you don't want to do with an RFC is go off for an entire sprint cycle. And especially if you don't have buy-in, right? There may be people who go, you know what, this is such an important decision. Spend the sprint getting sign off, right? Like, don't spend 2 weeks writing it, but spend the sprint getting sign off where we need these stakeholders to all agree that this is the right move, right? That's cool if you have this sort of like ivory tower environment. But a lot of times what I would end up doing is writing an RFC partially for me to get my argument together, especially because if I thought that was going to get pushed back, right? If you're doing something that can make a big impact, it can deeply affect what I call like sacred cow, right? Sacred cow, or you worrying about you say somebody's baby's ugly, right? So sometimes you'll have somebody with a pet project in an organization and you realize either it was just always a bad idea or it was maybe it's past its time. It's just not the right thing anymore. And you need to have a way of kind of like presenting a way to move on, right? Or presenting that maybe, and it could be that you don't have to abandon some like custom software, but maybe it needs, another feature so that you can get past some, CI/CD, hang up that's causing friction in the organization. To me, in an RFC, it shows that you're a deep thinker about a topic, right? Is that it says, okay, we don't just YOLO this. We're not doing the jazz ensemble. This is actually important enough that we need an orchestra, right? We need to think about the composer. Thinking that I can, okay, yes, but I'm thinking more about my team, thinking that I can get it to push to the organization. Company I'm in has very long-term employees. Much of what happens is well not there. Okay, yeah. So the optics of this is if you do an RFC and people go, oh, okay, so what you don't want to do is cargo cult, right? So cargo culting is this idea that organization A, Oxide, writes RFDs. I think Oxide's cool. If I write RFDs, I'll be as cool as Oxide, right? That's putting things backwards. What really is the fact is that Oxide's able to pull off cool things because they think deeply about stuff that's high impact, right? That's not cargo culting. That's recognizing a good pattern. And so if I'm doing some work that has deep impact, that could impact a lot of things, but hopefully in a positive way, I need to think about it strategically. I need to say, here's my background and framing. I understand the problem. Here's where I think that the solution, if we go about it this way, we will fundamentally solve this problem. Here's where I think code changes might require it. Here's where I think that it might be disruptive. Here's where I think it's actually going to make things better, right? Make your case as to like why anyone should care about what's going on. And once you do that, that's where the RFC goes, hey, I need to get sign off on this thing. And if you can rally up the troops and say, okay, yeah, this is awesome. Yeah, this is great. Especially if you can also say, if this is good, then I want to work on this ADR for this. I think it's going to take, a little bit of design time. Here's the risks that I think that are in place. Depending on, again, on how formal your system is, you would kick into that next phase. But the whole point of these is to de-risk something that's potentially scary, right? Or it's to set a foundation for saying, this is how we do stuff, right? I keep coming back to the Will Larson thing, but a lot of strategy stuff that he would cite in the book would be like, I think it was a Stripe or something. They had decided that, yes, while they had microservices, they're only going to support one language. So a lot of companies will use microservices and say, okay, this team uses Go, this team uses Python, this team uses Java, right? But they said, well, it's actually going to slow down our team's ability to understand and reason about systems if they're switching languages. We had something similar to this at fintech company that I used to work with. They settled on Python. Python, it was funny, the joke was that Python was everyone's second favorite language. Like it was not anyone's first choice, but it was very pragmatic for the machine learning stuff that we were doing. And it was pragmatic because it was easier for folks to switch. We liked fast API. There's a few like tooling things that were made it fine. Really good. Alembic was being used. So, we had really good schema migration tooling, stuff like this. And so there was a decision, right? And again, it was a decision that was like, this is what we do. This is our policy that's in place. And if anybody wanted to deviate from that, you had to come up with a pretty amazing counterexample, like, oh, well, Python's not supported in environment X, Y, or Z, or actually, this is so important, I'm actually going to write this module in C++ and then put a Python wrapper around it, right? Or whatever. That was the deeper arguments. You could deal with those on a case-by-case basis, but RFC and ADRs should serve this idea of de-risking, bold and high-impact things. So yeah, the fundamentals of software are talked about, RFCs and ADRs. That's you guys. So that's reminded. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly the other part of this is that you write things down. So they go, what you don't want to have is this issue. One of the things that's nice about an RFC, if I get us all to agree that we're always going to have an as of data column, right? If we just had a meeting and we're like, hey, for this project, we're just going to put as of, and it's important for temporal reasons or whatever, it's probably going to get lost, right? Somebody makes this decision. Maybe you document it inside of your code base. Maybe these things happen. The world moves on. New projects spin up. No one else implements this thing that's a really good idea. And it's your fault because there was no RFC. There was no ADR. There was no sort of like owning why this is such an amazing thing. You solved this categorical problem. if you have an RFC, if you have an ADR, you have something to fall back onto. And again, in companies that have good RFC and ADR setups, I'll go and peruse the documents, especially if I'm like curious about teams that have a lot of respect for. I'll go look at their RFCs, or I'll look at their ADRs and go, oh man, like they put out this high throughput Kafka cluster or whatever, and they used the full planning cycle, and they've had, no major outages, and they're able to ship quickly, and they've been able to do all these things on top of it. So just recently I found that my engineers started provisioning users one way, which is not how we were doing it before, right? I don't even remember having the conversation, which made me think about this. Yes. So again, Larson's book's top of mind, but his argument was that every organization is implementing a engineering strategy, whether it's documented or not, right? So that team went off and came up with a plan that seemed to make sense. It was internally consistent for them, right? I would say all design decisions, you should always default with smart engineers under time constraints make a decision for what they're looking to do. And if there isn't any guidance, then they may come up to wildly different conclusions than that are in place. Looping this back to large language models actually has been interesting because we've now got this like rule sync framework in place where we maintain a set of rules and skills and these other helpers. And we actually use this as a living document to not only put all of our goals and guidance of like, here's how we write, always use conventional commits, or here's how we write a PR description. Not only can humans read this, but the large language models are constrained to use these. And so we have these little framework in place that it always has to add this stuff into its context window. So that even if somebody who's completely, ignorant about the rules and maybe didn't even read the documentation, the large language model will actually like guide them in the right direction. So it's another case for why having these things written down and in a good place is more important than ever, right? For the humans and the large language models. But I would take that as a learning moment, right? If they took this thing in a new direction, probably doing an assessment, some sort of postmortem of, is this done in a way that fundamentally violates how user provisioning should work at the organization? Or is there some innovative ideas in there that actually could be incorporated into the larger way of doing it? Or is this an opportunity now to get an RFC on the correct way of doing it and reaching out to the team and saying, hey, I wish we had this earlier. We'd love your feedback because I saw that you did this different implementation. And I think that there's a case that we need to do this consistently moving forward, right? That there's these security risks, or the cognitive load's too high because if it's, these things provision users this way, but this one uses a different way, we could have emergent, security vulnerabilities or outages or something, right? Like there's some way of framing it that way. But you could bring it back to your home life, right? So for instance, if you make, dual income and you're making great money and you spend within your means, you maybe don't need a super strict budget. You probably can let you and your spouse or your loved one or whatever, kind of just riff a little bit within their best, personal judgment. But if you either want to really understand where all your money goes, or you're having problems like you're running up a bunch of debt, then you probably need to have a stricter set of strategy and guidelines, right, around how you operate as a household, right? And so it could be that keeping it informal is just fun because it's fine and everything's good. And you have good systems in place so that the constraints are there. You're already putting money away for retirement. You have a good emergency fund. You have these basic things in place. But if you're not disciplined and you're having a lot of chaos in your life because money's always tight every month, even though you're making a decent income and you're spread super thin on debt, you can kind of think these same feelings that you might have in your personal life is exactly how it works with engineering teams, right? It's, if things are going really well and the creativity juices are flowing and there's no real problems with the default decisions people are making, you can keep strategy informal. But you do need formality when there's confusion, or if you realize that you're not executing the way you think you should be able to, right? We went through a period personally where we didn't really have a locked in budget. You just get sloppy, right? You just spend money on things that, or at least we spent money on things that are just like not super necessary. And I had to tighten my belt loop a little bit when I was between a reduction in force and me getting back into consulting. And it gave us an opportunity to do a big reset. And now that I'm pulling in money, decent money again, we actually have like this super optimized budget, which is, I don't know, it's pretty cool. It's like having a superpower. And it's just one of those things where sometimes you just don't notice you need extra structure until you need it. Yeah. All previous decisions irrelevant. Amazing. Yes. And so, again, to get back to Will Larson brings up this idea that like, there's also these epically terrible strategies, right? Coming in and saying everything everyone else did before me is wrong. So somebody in the comments said, and then there's this ex-FANG manager who comes in and declares all previous decisions irrelevant. That's a strategy. That is a strategy. Is it an effective strategy? Probably not. It violates what they call Chesterton's fence, which is this idea that you don't dismantle a broken fence until you understand why it was there in the first place. And so, it might be unsightly. You might not like it. You might not like the structure of it, but it might be useful for something, right? It might be there for any number of reasons. And it's hubris to think that you can just come in and steamroll some stuff. Now, sometimes dismantling that fence without asking questions in like wartime leadership can be effective, but it's super risky, super, super risky. Yeah. And it's sometimes people just want to shake things up and have a bold move, into what they're doing. I would say that more times than not, it's probably the wrong strategy, right? We could see this with government strategy recently with like the Doge stuff, right? Even if you assume this idea that there was all this like government waste, and that the government can be run more efficiently, which I think most people agree with, the way that they went about it was really stupid, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that like young college graduates who don't really understand how the world works and thinks that a bunch of algorithms can solve everything is short-sighted, right? There's a reason that it's as complicated and as stupid as it is without having to be like even stupider to fight it. No way. I don't think I'll ever see that. Yeah, no, it's completely nuts. But I think sometimes from a strategic standpoint, some folks, I think, this is actually really good. This is a really good thing to think about. The other thing that's happening with large language models, and the podcast episode with Carl Brown, I said that, if you're not careful, large language models are Dunning-Kruger powered tech debt machines, right? So Dunning-Kruger powered tech debt machine is that I don't know how awful my ideas are because first of all, the large language model is just telling me it's great, right? Oh, this is so amazing. It's such a good idea. And I'm just cranking out, 10,000, 50,000 lines of code. And I think there's this problem right now where there's like a bunch of CEOs who all of a sudden have like come back and think that they're like, prototype quality code is actually just like the future, and they get frustrated. Like you've heard about these folks, they get frustrated with the fact that their engineering team's not moving fast enough, but they don't understand how much risk that they're introducing. They don't understand the fact that like software engineering as a discipline doesn't just go away just because you can crank out a bunch of code and make a demo work. So I think in a weird way, we're getting this pressure to like not review code, not think about stuff, it doesn't matter that the code quality is not great because you can just ask it to write more code to fix it, which is just kind of completely nuts if you really think about it. And there's this sort of like strategy, right? It's like, let the vibes of the large language model do this. I think that this is incredibly misguided. I think that spending a little bit of extra time, even with a large language model, which I use a lot, actually, I use these to help brainstorm ideas that I am grounded in. Like, I understand what's going on. And so I'll kind of like come up with a spec or come up with an RFC, get it to kind of poke holes in ideas, or get it to do research, which I think is actually one of the, I don't know why people don't talk about this more, but if you ask a large language model to go out and do research and cite its sources, so especially if it's like a fantastic claim, it has to cite the source, then you can go check those sources. Super awesome, right? Especially if you're doing an RFC and you're looking for prior art or background or doing these other things. And you can write these documents faster than you used to be able to. So you don't have to just do AI slop. A lot of times too, it'll do that thing. It's like, it's not this, it's that, right? I like try to do these like standoffish, sort of like really dumb, putting the M dashes and the bullet point list and everything in there. Like, you got to rein that stuff in, of course. But if you want it to be able to go and look at, 300 websites in parallel, looking for keywords and then looking for a larger theme, even if it misses a lot of good context, it's going to introduce ideas that I didn't have before, right? And I think that if you own the output, of the RFC, if you're the one who's putting yourself on the line for writing a good guidance document that's supposed to turn into good policy that can then be, operationalized, that to me is what a good RFC is, right? It's, can I do the big philosophical work before I have to do the heavy lifting on the architecture? And then on the architecture side, can I design the system so that it's elegant, so that when I start having to deal with edge cases or reality, the things that I didn't know about, I still have a good architectural foundation. Actually, this is another thing that just came up. What was it? It was the Rob Pike rules. Somebody just shared this. Oh my gosh. Rob Pike, 5 rules. This one's great. Let me see if I can find timeless guidance. This is one of those where you just, I go back and I haven't read it. Yeah, here we go. Telling me that Cassandra made large changes to a specific protocol in a patch version, giving me Jira's unrelated. Oh man, I know it's terrible. I will say, like, I'm large language models are kind of like the world that we live in now, but I have a lot of trepidation about them. I was just telling you what you wanted to hear, right? Yeah. It's almost like it's incentivized to lie to us to get us to use it more. Yeah, the 5 rules. So these are more timeless than ever, right? So rule number 1, unpredictable bottlenecks. You can't know where a program will spend its time until you measure. Rule number 2, measure first. Optimize only after you have concrete timing data. Oh wait, these aren't the actual original rules though. This is somebody else's. Let me see if I can find the original. Ugh, of course. Can I not wrap? This is terrible. Why would you not wrap? Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I think this is the original source. I tried going to it earlier, and I think this ended up failing because it went on to Hacker News a couple days ago, and here we go. Circa 1989, which is, way ahead of his time. But as you probably know from the podcast, I'm like a Rob Pike fanboy. But rule number 1, you can't tell where a program is going to spend its time. Bottlenecks occur in surprising places. So don't try to second guess and put in a speed hack until you've proven where the bottleneck is. And again, these are not just about software, right? This is about architectural design, all these other things. Anytime I've ever gotten messed up in stuff, it's because I've violated these kind of ideas, right? Of just like the Yagni kind of principle. So measure, don't tune for speed until you've measured. And even then, don't unless the part of the code overwhelms the rest. Number 3, fancy algorithms are slow when N is small. an in is usually small. And I think this is such a good reminder. It's like, unless you're doing some Cloudflare level, incredible throughput, you really don't need to get into these exotic algorithms. Fancy algorithms have big constants. Until you know that n is frequently going to be big, don't get fancy, right? Even if n does get big, use rule 2 first, right? Measure. So it might not matter, right? It might not matter that your crazy algorithm saves, 30 nanoseconds if that's not the constraint on the system. Rule number 4, fancy algorithms are bigger than simple ones, and they're much harder to implement. Use simple algorithms as well as simple data structures. And this apparently is like a tie back to like a Tony Hoare quote. And I think Tony Hoare and Ken Thompson both have like talked about this one specifically, that using simple algorithms as well as simple data structures is just such good sage wisdom. This is why, they're like monks when it comes to this stuff. Rule 5, data dominates. If you've chosen the right data structures and organize things well, the algorithm will almost always be self-evident. Data structures, not algorithms, are central to programming. And you can see why programming languages like Rust and Go and Zig that are structure first, right? You some people find this very annoying, but I am increasingly a big fan of like, they have a struct data type. I'm going to think about my data structures. I'm going to think about the methods that are on these data structures. And if I kind of have like an elegant way of thinking about how these things live and are passed around and do stuff, I've never once regretted it. I've never once regretted putting that upfront thought on the structure of something. And again, I think that these rules from, Rob Pike's sort of view on stuff in 1989 is timeless. It really is true, even with all the systems and stuff that we're starting to do these days. But also, large language models do not follow these rules, right? This would actually be like, it'd be really funny to come up with some skills that, constrain your programming to always follow the Rob Pike 5 rules of programming. I think that would be probably pretty cool. But these are the kind of core principles that most code on the internet, which is what large language models are trained on, don't follow. And so therefore, it lacks the pattern recognition to understand that, first of all, it's just hitting tokens. It's just trying to figure out what the next most likely token is. But this is what our job is. And this part of our job won't change, right? Really what this is saying is, you don't know what a system's going to do until you build the system. You have to be able to measure your system to understand if it's doing what you want it to do or not. Don't optimize for crazy edge cases until you know you actually have crazy edge cases. And you only know if you have crazy edge cases if you measure those crazy edge cases. That super fancy, implementations almost always are harder to reason about, and that it's probably a cope for the fact that you didn't think about your data structures up front. Like if you just that's the kind of like riff way of thinking about it. And that's true. And this goes for like any of the things that we're talking about today. And I would say in your RFCs, in your ADRs and these other things, that's the sort of like parting wisdom I'm going to leave you. But yeah, we're actually at time. I was running about 5 minutes late, and I think this is actually probably a good time to wrap things up. I hope that answers some questions. I hope this was interesting. I really appreciate y'all hopping on and asking good questions, and hopefully you got some value out of this. So awesome. Well, cool. Well, have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to y'all later. Sweet.